welcome back to the MCU review. If you're watching this on release day, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. If you're watching this any other day, thank you for watching, and hope you had a Merry Christmas. I'm Baloney, part of the Chicago Sports Bums. I'm alongside my fellow Chicago Sports Bum, Dougie. The reason we're doing these MCU reviews, if you guys remember episode 1, we talked about Dougie never seeing a Marvel movie ever in the history of his life, and also never even reading any comic books as a kid or anything like that. So we've got a fresh one with us, and alongside us, we have a seasoned veteran. If Dougie's the young new talent, CPG, you guys know him as Comic Punk Guy. He is our seasoned veteran. He's all things comic books. CPG, thank you for doing this with us.
Oh yeah, dude. I like being called a seasoned veteran. I would like to think that because I'm able to do the Marvel stuff and the DC stuff and everything in between, I'm kind of like the Bo Jackson of comic books and understanding. I could also probably run up a wall if I tried really hard.
I like that. The Bo Jackson, the Deion Sanders, maybe too. He did a little bit of that. Yeah. And you're abiding by the Deion Sanders playbook of look good, feel good, play good. You look like $1 million,
dude.
I'm trying. It is. It's not every day that you find a Wu-Tang Clan's Christmas sweater that you buy to make your mother uncomfortable in your size.
Well, you're making us more than comfortable. I love it.
Hell yeah, dude. Like, as soon as you got on, I was like, God damn. I'm like, he looks like he came straight out of the More Money, More Problems music video. I was like, this was great.
When we started this, I knew we wanted to have you along. I knew we wanted to pick your brain for at least a couple of these. And you kind of dropped a bombshell on me early on saying the movie we're going to review first, The Incredible Hulk. That's one of your most underrated comic book movies. And I don't know if a lot of people have that same sentiment. So before we get into the movie, just explain a little bit about why you like this movie so much.
So where most of the MCU movies at this point in time, and most of the ones in this particular phase, are love letters to specific like runs and characters as a whole, kind of more like a broader spectrum of the characters, especially with Captain America and Thor and Iron Man. This movie is a hodgepodge of a lot of different things, but it is a love letter to the Lou Ferrigno and Bill Bixby television show that I grew up watching. There is a lot of that show in this movie, and a lot of people didn't expect that or didn't know that was the vibe that they were going for. The opening credits where you see Edward Norton in the chair when the initial experiment takes place that turns him into the Hulk, that is shot for shot the opening of the Incredible Hulk TV show from the 70s. So it is much more about that than it is about a specific run of the comic books. It's much more about that than anything that came before it. And there's a good reason for that. And I'll let you guys know about that once we get to roll credits on the first movie.
All right. So yeah, before we get into it, one last thing, because you mentioned watching the old school, the Lou Ferrigno Incredible Hulk as a kid. I was, a latchkey kid, if you will. We come home from school, just watch reruns, and that's how I remember watching the Lou Ferrigno Hulk on like WCIU or Channel 26 or one of the old Chicagoland TV stations where it used to show the old shows. You're a little younger than me though, so you said you remember watching those as a kid?
Yeah. So my uncle was a bodybuilder, and he loved Lou Ferrigno and the Incredible Hulk, and he loved like Schwarzenegger. So those were his inspirations. So he lived with my grandfather at the time, and on the door that you had to go up the stairs to his part of the house that was the attic was a picture of like Lou Ferrigno and like full Hulk, and it was really cool. And that's kind of one of the things that got me into superheroes. It's kind of one of the things that kept me like, always those little things that I remember. And that's how I wound up watching is I sought these things out when I was younger because I wanted to watch them. And there was like, you kind of had the beginning of the internet where the things were a little bit more easily accessible than like today where everything is accessible. But you could just find, anything. Like I remember watching the Incredible Hulk and you know, they're like Thor popped up in one. I think there was Daredevil was in one episode, but it's all very vague compared to what it's like now.
All right, now before we get into it, Dougie, I know you said you're an MCU virgin and a comic book virgin, if you will, but obviously the Incredible Hulk is more than just a comic figure, you know, like he's outside of the zeitgeist. So what did you know about the Hulk? Obviously, maybe like the Hulk smash and the toys or something.
Yeah, pretty much that was it. Like, you know, you see the like people with the, you know, like the beer fist, you know,
Yeah,
things or whatever. Yeah.
yeah.
It, weirdly enough, the only way that I knew like who Lou Ferrigno was, and that was cool when I noticed him in the movie because I was like, oh,
Mhm.
I'm catching something, you know, was from I think the movie's called I Love You Man when they're trying to
Yeah.
sell his house. Yeah. So that's how I knew he was the Hulk. Like, otherwise, other than that, I probably wouldn't have known that. But yeah, when I saw him as the security guard or whatever, like taking a
Yeah.
pizza bribe, I was like, that's kind of cool. Yeah, you know,
That's a good reference. That's a good reference to catch.
yeah. I actually I'm on to a couple Easter eggs that we'll talk about here. I think I don't know.
All
Maybe
right.
I'm just, but we'll get to them.
All right, so let's get into it. Incredible Hulk, directed by Louis Leterrier, budgeted at 150 million, a box office of 264.8 million. It stars Edward Norton as Bruce Banner, Liv Tyler as Betty Ross, William Hurt as General Thunderbolt Ross, Tim Roth as Emil Blonsky, aka the Abomination, and Tim Blake Nelson as Dr. Samuel Stearns. You mentioned it has cameos by Lou Ferrigno and another Stan Lee cameo that we'll get to when we get into the movie. So let's get into it. You mentioned the credits. You mentioned the beginning of the movie CPG, where it's an homage to the old school Incredible Hulk TV show, and that's really where I feel like the intro was pretty fast. And if you missed it, if you got to the movie late, you missed the whole experiment where Bruce Banner turns into the Hulk and they're experimenting with the gamma rays and Thunderbolt Ross is there. I feel like they obviously did it on purpose and they sped up quickly, but like right away, like a minute and a half into the movie, we're 5 years later and we're in Brazil. So that's where my slideshow starts. It's Edward Norton, aka Bruce Banner, in Brazil, and he's trying to control not only his rage, but more of his heartbeat. I think in the movie they are trying to keep him under 200 beats per minute. Otherwise, he turns into a big green rage monster. So, so he's in Brazil working at a bottling plant for what CPG. Do you know if this was a soda or a juice? It seemed like it was something.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's like those like kind of whatever the Brazilian version of Jarritos are.
Okay, I like that.
You know,
I mean,
that's what I always thought that they were.
I'll mess with a jarrito for sure.
Oh yeah.
So he's working at this bottling plant. He is confronted by the most like stereotypical Brazilian bad guys, kind of like the local goons, if you will. And they're kind of testing him. They're testing him to see if his heartbeat gets above 200. From there, he is sorry. So he's confronted. He's also communicating with Mr. Blue via computer. And that goes, we'll touch on that later in the movie, but when the drop of blood hits the bottle, General Thunderbolt Ross is able to track that down, and he sends Emil Blonsky to confront the Hulk. Basically, they want to get Banner back into the United States. And 26 minutes into the movie, that's where we initially meet the Incredible Hulk with his emo bangs and everything. So Dougie, this is where we get started. This is where the Hulk starts. What do you think about that first, quarter of the movie?
So I could really appreciate the beginning of the movie, how they just got down like right to it. I was very happy that they didn't like drag that whole like scene out for somebody that doesn't really. I mean, I kind of understood, Hulk get angry, Hulk smash. I'm not, I knew that, but to get the backstory in that little short of time, I personally like that. I didn't need them to drag that out for a half an hour for me to learn how everything starts. So totally appreciate that. I personally didn't understand the significance of like the cut in the blood and everything like that. And so that brings me to like the first thing that I've kind of noticed. So the old guy that drinks the drink and dies, he was in the first movie too, right?
Yeah, so I did a bad job of explaining to you that that is, basically the creator of uh the Marvel comic books, along with like Steve Ditko and some other people, but that is
Oh
Stan Lee.
shit. Okay.
Stan Lee is a cult figure to a lot of people, and he does do throughout the MCU movies, you're gonna see him in
Okay.
cameos. I'm sure
All right.
you picked that up. You picked that up pretty quickly.
Well, I saw him, in the next movie that we're doing too, but I was just like, I didn't know who he was. So, I figured he was somebody, or if it was going to be a character that they would build up later. I don't know. That was kind of what I was
It was
getting at
more
with
of a
the Easter
cameo.
egg.
CPG, before we get
Okay.
into the, second quarter of the movie, if you will, do you want to expound on either the beginning of the Incredible Hulk or Stan Lee for Dougie?
Yeah, so Stan Lee is every character with the exception of Captain America that you're going to see in the first phase. Stan Lee's had a hand in pretty heavily. Uh,
Okay.
he's single-handedly, not single-handedly, that is a myth. He, with help from a lot of people that were not credited for many years, developed your Spider-Mans, Hulk, Iron Man, all that sort of stuff. So it's he's pretty much he was the brains behind all this stuff when it was debuting and then being put into comics for the first time. The significance of the blood in the drink comes in later in the movie. Just more or less like all of the Hulk supporting cast in the comics sort of come from the Hulk in one way or another, and that was kind of his blood being a huge part of it. And some of the gamma radiation and stuff like that. So far though, like the first, I remember the first appearance of this Hulk, I was like, okay, so we're not Eric Bana's head cartoon, like very cartoonishly on a giant CGI body. This is it's its own character. It's not Edward Norton's face or anything like that. CGI and face mapping hadn't quite gotten there yet. By the time Mark Ruffalo takes over for the character, it's really, really good. But at that time, they didn't really have the technology. So having him kind of be its own thing was really good because there's from comics to movies, there's a good run in there where they very much draw a definitive line between Banner and the Hulk, and having them look different is a really good like indication for that. This movie kind of really nailed that.
Yeah, they purposely wanted a differentiation. Even up until like I mentioned, the emo hair. They gave the Hulk emo bangs for a little bit. Which I didn't mind as an emo kid myself. Like I didn't mind that haircut. I might have had that in high school. So
not inaccurate to the comics. Like
yeah.
He's had that in one way or another. I mean, he's had every hairstyle known to man, but yeah, it's not out of the ordinary.
Let's see. And the one thing I was going to say, like, I didn't really I guess never really seeing the Hulk against like other people. I feel like this Hulk was like undersized for what I thought he was going to be. I thought this dude was going to be massive. And then when I kind of saw him, I was like, oh, he's a little bit smaller than I guess I had envisioned. Um, from everything else that I've seen,
That's a great point, Dougie. And that's also it's tough doing these because you don't want to spoil future things, and I don't want to give things away. But as a whole, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I feel like the Hulk has purposely been almost like underpowered and undersized. CPG, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, there was, I think with the Eric Bana Hulk movie that came out a couple of years before this one, that there was a stigma around the Hulk that like he gets mean as he gets more angry, he gets meaner, stronger, and bigger was never really a thing.
Yeah.
Compared to the Eric Bana Hulk, he's a dwarf, right? He's like not as big, but I think as I think as time went on, it wound up kind of being appropriate. In this movie, I do agree. I remember being in the movie theater. I think I'd skipped school to see it, and had I'm like, man, he's small for a Hulk. But it kind of works.
Yeah.
It kind of works because even though he's smaller than what you would think this kind of monster would turn into, the amount of destruction he's able to delve out is just like, man, this thing is stronger than anything.
Yeah, hell yeah.
So speaking of feeling undersized, after the first encounter with the Hulk, Emil Blonsky, Tim Roth's character, goes to General Thunderbolt Ross and says, one, what the hell was that? And two, how can I get in on some of that action? So they explain the super soldier serum, which we'll get into in future movies. But the Abomination character that we'll talk about, the Emil Blonsky character, he goes basically 3 rounds with the Hulk throughout this movie. And this first round is the realization of like, hey, I want to get in on this action. So they tease the super soldier serum, they tease some things, but in the end, Thunderbolt Ross agrees, and he gives Tim Roth or Emil Blonsky an injection of something. So we get back to the United States. Banner returns to Culver City, and he's shacking up with the most Italian pizza maker in the history of Italian pizza makers. And he's hiding from Betty Ross, but kind of looking at her through windows and behind trees and things like that. And this second quarter of the movie, I could only explain it as I talked about the emo bangs. This is just like an emo movie, or an emo music video. He's hiding behind dumpsters so he's not seen. It's raining all the time, and they finally reunite. And again, there's a theme in this movie where when the dramatics hit, it starts raining. And so they reunite, and Emil Blonsky goes through the procedure, and then right before the what I'm going to call halftime of the movie, Thunderbolt Ross and Blonsky again confront the Hulk at Culver University. So now we're at like halftime of the movie. Dougie, how are you feeling?
I mean, I think that we're building this up pretty good. I dug that. I thought once we got to this university thing that it was going to be more of a battle between like the two big dudes, but it didn't turn out that way. And I going back to what you were saying too, it was just, that was one of my notes, was the weird timing of rain during this movie. I mean, it happened like multiple times, and it was just like, guy saves girl, rain, like guy meets girl, rain, and I was like, this is like, somebody's got to like point this out and be like, hey, listen, maybe we should crush it on the rain for a minute here, But once they get to that university scene and everything like that, and I was so, and it was probably because I had a few beers in me, I was so focused on, and I can't remember his name, the general with his mustache.
Yeah.
I was so focused on his mustache that like I was having a hard time focusing. He was like the one character from like Dr. Seuss with like the big
the Lorax.
Yeah, it's a Lorax. Yeah. I'm like, this dude, but he was rocking it, man. So like they get through that whole battle or whatever and everything like that, and then what's his face gets just absolutely chest kicked.
So I got that here, and I talk about round 2 of Blonsky versus the Hulk, and he's keeping up with him for a second. Like even Thunderbolt Ross has that quote. He's like, "My God, he's doing it," because he does have the extra stamina and the extra strength and the extra endurance, and he's keeping up with the Hulk. And he's like, "Oh my God!" And then all of a sudden, the Hulk just yeets him into a tree, and you're like, "Well, that's the end of Blonsky."
Oh, dude, it was just a roadhouse,
So Blonsky gets yeeted. Betty Ross and Bruce Banner escape into, again, we'll talk about the rain. They escape into a cave. because
Yeah.
whenever there's
Or
a
it
universe
rains inside the cave.
where
Also,
it
Yeah,
rains inside the
right.
cave, and
Yes.
it's the most emo. Now it's emo Hulk and emo Betty Ross, and they escape, and then they're on the lam. So they're on the lam for a bit, and they sync up with Mr. Blue, and the whole point is that Bruce Banner doesn't want to be the Hulk anymore. He wants to be cured of whatever it is that happened to him. So what they do is they strap him in and they try to administer an antidote. While this is all happening, miraculously, because of the super soldier serum, Blonsky is healed from his car crash wounds and like every bone broken in his body. He's healed like miraculously, and he's back hunting the Incredible Hulk. So they escape. He's supposedly healed, but we don't know. We don't know for a fact if the symptoms are going to come back. We don't know if the Hulk's going to come back. We don't know how it's going to work, and they don't either. While this is all happening, the Abominate or the Emil Blonsky convinces Mr. Blue to inject them with even more of Bruce Banner's blood, and that's where we get the Abomination. So then the last half of the movie is basically just the Abomination versus the Incredible Hulk in Harlem, New York, and they're going ham. So Dougie, how are we feeling about, basically two monsters going ham on a major city in New York?
So I have to rewind just for a quick second,
Okay.
because there was something that kind of lost me with this movie. And what lost me with this movie was I was under the impression that it was when he gets angry, that's when he turns to Hulk. He's getting rubbed on in the bed, and then all of a sudden, so this dude can't even have relations with women without turning into the Hulk. And I'm like, so okay, so now this dude gets rage boners, right? Okay. So he can't even, like, no wonder why the dude wants to be human again. Could you imagine that? Like going through life, like not being able to like get like attracted by a woman or or whatever like attracts you, and then like all of a sudden next thing you know you turn into an angry Hulk. I was like, shit, it pisses him off. I get that. Like him getting like sexually turned on or something like that, and then turning into Hulk kind of lost me a little bit. Okay.
That's that. Imagine, I mean, we all get the blue balls. That's the next level. Green balls. That's the next level of blue
Dude,
balls.
that's where the
telling you,
transformation
man.
actually starts.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is what I will say, going from Iron Man 1 to this, the fight scene definitely was amped up. It was more of, good guy versus bad guy like at the end. It was what was missing in Iron Man 1 for me. Like Iron Man 1, the fight was, it was like it was over like that. Okay? This was like, yeah, they're destroying a city, they're going back and forth. It was really well done. It was a shitload of what's it called? CGI.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
Yeah,
I mean there's nothing that you can do about it, and it was just a product of the time, and it looked pretty bad in certain points
yeah.
for its age.
Yeah, you got to figure. I mean, at the time, it never really stood out to me. But now going back, like you mentioned, there were things that were like, whoa. Even like the, like helicopters landing on rooftops and stuff like that. That some of that was
Yeah.
like, whoa, that's not that great. The
Yeah.
only other note I had for the last quarter of the movie, and it's something that I noticed on the rewatch, is like, obviously the Abomination, Emil Blonsky, he's just a rage monster. There's almost like no thought to him at that point. Whereas the Incredible Hulk, there's still a part of Bruce Banner in there, and I like how they do like him either like grabbing a car, excuse me, grabbing a car and using it as a shield, or using the chains to choke the Abomination, just showing that there's still some brain behind that.
Yeah, not just kill, kill,
yeah.
kill.
I think so. There's a lot that goes into why, like how Emil Blonsky's transformation into the Abomination differs so much from what Bruce Banner deals with being a Hulk, right? And like it comes with like it's a two. He's truly is an abomination. He's two things. He's the super soldier serum from World War II, which they touch on, which is there's an incredible story of how that even made it into the movie, and then the Bruce Banner's like blood infusion that he got. And one of the things about the super soldier serum, which is prevalent in the comics and later on in the movies, is that the super soldier serum, it not only amplifies who you are like physically, giving you the physical attributes of the increased stamina, the muscle, and everything else, it also affects your kind of like moral compass. So that the qualities that come out of you as a person, it makes good better and makes bad worse. And the cool thing about Emil Blonsky is that on the surface of his like character, Emil Blonsky is a career in the trenches soldier. He's not a bad guy. So
Right.
when that drive of completing objectives and whatever, and they even talk about his age and like, why are you still enlisted? You should be an officer by now. And he's like, no, man, I'm a fighter. And like that really just they killed it with casting Tim Roth as the Abomination. I would say for this movie has probably one of the most complete casts that that a Marvel movie can have, with the exception of the main role. But like that's because he's playing Bill Bixby and he's not playing like Bruce Banner as a character. It goes hand in hand with that stuff about the old TV show. But Blonsky's like transformation is so well done in this, and it doesn't necessarily coincide so much with the comics, and that's okay. It's one of those instances of the MCU doing it right.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, like the cast is awesome. Like obviously, Tim Roth is amazing. One of my favorite movies is Requiem for, or not Requiem, Reservoir. My English, please. Reservoir Dogs. One of my favorite movies of all time, and he just kills it in this role. But you mentioned Edward Norton, and like him playing Bill Bixby and not Bruce Banner. It does seem like he was, because I like Edward Norton a lot. I think he's a hell of an actor, yeah. But in this role, it didn't seem like he was either fully committed, and that's not even the case, because I hear stories about him like wanting to rewrite the script, and he was really invested, and he wanted to work on his backstory and all of that stuff, but it just never was really fully fleshed out for me.
Yeah, and that, you know, the control that Edward Norton won over the character and a lot of the things going forward is what led to him kind of not being the guy they went with. He was involved in the script writing and rewriting process for Incredible Hulk, and he wanted the same for Avengers, and they wouldn't do it, so he pieced out or whatever. You know, he likes a lot of creative freedom, which there's nothing wrong with that. Some of his roles that he's been in where he's had that have been spectacular. I think for this one, though, you know, this is a popcorn movie, right? It's a you know, at that point, a budding franchise, and you know, not so much you know, an art house film like most of the stuff that he was doing, where he had that control and it really shined out and it was fun for everybody.
And I should mention William Hurt as General Thunderbolt Ross. I mean,
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. He plays the perfect mix of like badass, but also like motherfucker, like bad guy, like it jerk, like it's 10 out of 10. So that's the I mean, obviously we talked about the you know, the last quarter of the movie, and they just basically go ham on Harlem. The only other thing we're going to mention, because it's going to be prevalent in all of these movies, is the end credit scene. And in this one, Thunderbolt Ross is approached by Tony Stark and basically intimating that we're building a team, and he says, "Who's we?" And that's how the movie ends.
Yeah. So are you guys ready for the bombshell?
Hit me.
So that scene was filmed when the movie was already completed, because it was never supposed to happen. The Incredible Hulk script originally was a sequel to Ang Lee's Hulk with Eric Bana. The reason the MCU at that point in time of that film's development was not a thing. Iron Man was in development and had filmed, but there was no real at that time. The cinematic universe thing was not something that was being discussed outwardly, it was something that was kind of being toyed around with Paramount at the time, and what they were going to be able to do with the Marvel properties that they were trying to acquire and wanted to have. The post-credit scene for Iron Man, where Nick Fury shows up, was filmed the same week that this movie was, or this scene was filmed, because that's when they made the decision that we're going to do a cinematic universe. Which is really interesting. Like, to me, it's very interesting after the fact. So the reason why this movie is much more rooted in the Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno show from the 70s, and not so much the MCU as a whole, was because it was never meant to be. And it was done after the fact. When you back in the university scene, when the guy from Silicon Valley is, doing his stuff on the computer, all that stuff showing S.H.I.E.L.D., all done after the fact, was never supposed to be there. And that, to me, was like them really, okay, we're going to do this, and they had to retrofit this movie in. There's a subsect of the Marvel fan base, or MCU fan base rather, that does not acknowledge this as an MCU movie. It's something you could just forget because of that, and I don't agree with, because I think it's a really fun movie. Even though they're like, during the fight where they break Harlem is just egregious with advertisements, but like
all over the place.
All over the place. Yeah.
And you can see the Budweiser behind here, the 7-Eleven behind here.
Yeah. It's everywhere. And like, they're like the Hulk game that kind of came out during the time that this game came out, or that this movie came out, or whatever. This was never supposed to be an MCU movie. It was originally supposed to be a sequel. It was a sequel to the Ang Lee Hulk movie from 2003, and a happy marriage with that and the Lou Ferrigno and Bill Bixby show. And it's incredible how they were able to make a decent movie and also fit it into this budding universe.
Yeah, well, you mentioned it, and like, obviously it makes sense. So like, they tossed in, just like quickly on one of the computer screens, a picture of Nick Fury, Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury. But out of the entire Phase 1 MCU movies, this is the only one he's not in, because obviously they didn't expect him to be in this one. So that all makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the Incredible Hulk. Dougie, any questions before we get into your final grade? Because we asked you to grade all of these movies. You got any questions, whether it's about the Hulk or this movie in particular?
No. My main thing was about the blood and like
the boners.
Yes, and the boners.
The boner blood.
Because that just kind of blew my mind. But yeah, the main thing was the blood, and like, why, like, like injecting it in one person makes him strong, but then kills, now that I know, Stan Lee. But yeah, so I'll get into my grade. I'm going to give this a 6.1.
Okay. I want to write these down, because I said we're going to make a chart and we're going to kind of keep track of all of them.
Yeah. There was a lot of stuff that I mentioned that I loved about it, and then there was a lot of stuff that, like, I was just left me with more questions than answers, coming from somebody that didn't read any of the comics, didn't really, and that's how I'm gonna rate all these, as somebody that knows absolutely nothing, and how easy it is for me to figure out what is going on, so.
Yeah, I don't mind that. I mean, I'll give it a little bit higher than a 6.1. But I'm right around there. It'll be a 6.4 for me. But by no means, I was going back, like, it had been a while since I had seen it. And now doing this with you, Dougie, I went back, I watched, and it was definitely one of those movies that is like, wow, it wasn't as bad as I remembered it. Obviously, when it came out, and then compared to everything in the MCU, you want to like nitpick all this stuff. Like you mentioned, CPG, like some people don't even consider it an MCU movie. But going back at it, it had its moments, like the emo thing and the stereotypes and the Brazilian guys and stuff like that. But as a whole, I mean, it was perfectly watchable.
Yeah, it's a fun movie. It's a 7 for me because I don't believe in the point whatever scale, but like the it's a 7 because to me it's an episode of the TV show with better special effects, and it's at the same time there's parts of it that are living, breathing comic book, like the whole third act is.
Yeah.
The blood goes back to most so in the comics and stuff, most of Hulk's supporting cast and villains are all offshoots from the Hulk in some way, shape, or form, and they all affect everybody differently. There's MCU projects way down the line that kind of do the same thing where you're like, why was it different for this person and that person? And it comes down to gamma radiation and how they get the part of the Hulk in them. So like for Emil Blonsky, it's the combination of the two things, and then for Samuel Stearns, Mr. Blue, you see it drip into his head wound and you see his head start moving around. And, there's things that were put into motion back then that are coming to fruition very, very soon, almost 20 years or 10 years later.
We should mention
20
that.
years later.
And I'm glad you did mention that because, I mean, we could spoil it. I don't think it should it matter. Can we spoil it for Dougie?
I don't think that it's really necessarily a spoiler because nothing
he becomes
has been
the leader,
said about it.
Correct?
Yeah, he becomes the leader, but
there's a comic book character
in the comics
named
is
the
the
leader.
leader. And the leader gets the same kind of radiation the Hulk does, but it doesn't affect him in his like physical, like muscle form. It's his brain. So his head's like this big.
Yeah.
And it's that was the tease for that character is that, oh, Mr. Blue is Samuel Stearns. That's huge. And then we didn't hear anything about Samuel Stearns from that movie came out in what, 2009?
Yeah, 8 or 9. I think
8 or
2008.
9. And we haven't heard anything about Samuel Stearns potentially even returning to the MCU until probably about like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's something that's been put on the back burner, and it reinforced a lot of people's thoughts. This is not a true MCU movie, but it's right in line with the supporting characters for the Hulk. Another really great character that made an appearance there was the woman, Liv Tyler's character Betty Ross was dating another doctor. It was Doc Samson. Samson is another character who ends up with powers somehow that I can't remember at the moment exactly how. He has he's like Fabio with big flowing green hair. And he's the only character that I've seen that's like knocked out the Hulk in one punch that wasn't Superman. So it's like it was a cool, and I think he's played by the dude from like Modern Family.
Yeah, it was Phil Dunphy's character, or Phil Dunphy in Modern Family.
Yeah, and he's in it for a bit, and I was kind of him and I was really hoping for him to come back in some capacity because Doc Samson's character is awesome.
Okay,
but until we get there.
So when we're talking like big brains in the future, are we talking like Mars Attacks? Like
very similar.
Cone heads, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So that is The Incredible Hulk. That is the number 2 movie in the MCU if we're going by release order. And the third one that we're going to get into right now is Iron Man 2. So we're getting 2 Iron Man movies before you get introduced to any of the other characters that we're going to lead into the Avengers. Before we get into it, any thoughts on Iron Man 2 CBG or anything, like a tease or anything like that?
Iron Man 2 has aged like milk. It is very low. It's on the lower tier of what I want from MCU movies. I think there's brilliant casting in it. I think it's one of the few instances where an actor gets replaced by another one due to studio actor problems, and it winds up being better. That's Don Cheadle, I think, was head and shoulders better than Terrence Howard.
That's what I was going to ask you guys about that whole switch. So what's the story behind that? Like,
it's money. It was mostly money. Terrence Howard wanted to be paid at the same, if not more, I believe, that Robert Downey Jr. was getting, and they were not going to do that.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I think it's Terrence Howard, I think, was looking and knew that this was going to be a franchise opportunity and wanted to basically invest early, or wanted them to invest in him early, and they weren't sound with that. Don Cheadle comes in with like it's Don Cheadle, like how are you not gonna,
Yeah.
have it, and that
Yeah.
I think is kind of how that really shook out.
Yep.
But
The story
Okay.
was that he wanted Robert Downey Jr. money, and they offered him the same amount of money that Gwyneth Paltrow was making in the movie, and he turned it
Okay.
down. And
that
they're
would have
like,
been
well,
fair.
yeah, and which makes sense. And like you mentioned, he knew the tease of in the first movie, he looks at the suit and says, "Next time, baby." He knew
Yeah.
that his character was going to turn into War Machine. And in
Right.
that, he's
Yeah.
like, well, if I'm going to be one of the superheroes, I want to be paid superhero money, which I don't blame him
Okay.
for, but he went about it the
Yeah.
wrong way and he
Yeah.
fumbled the
Mhm.
bag. Because now you mentioned Don Cheadle. Don Cheadle's been in a bunch of these movies. Imagine all the money he's made.
Okay.
And then that Terrence Howard basically gave up by giving up this role. And
Yeah.
that's something I'm
Okay.
glad you mentioned now, Dougie, because I didn't mention it in the first movie because I wanted you to go into this movie surprised that the person was recast, basically.
Yeah, it was a little confusing because I had to I got lost in the movie a little bit, and I was like, wait, hold on, is that the same dude or is it like a different person now? And then when I realized it was the same dude, I'm like, man, I wonder what happened there. So
I
didn't mean
will
to interrupt, but I needed closure on that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I will say this, and a lot of people. I mean, I've had people disagree with me, but I've had a lot more people agree. I think that Robert Downey Jr.'s chemistry with Don Cheadle is way better than him and Terrence Howard in the first
Seemed
one.
like
Like, when they're in the first Iron Man, when they're in the plane and the stewardess are about to start dancing
Yeah,
on poles or
the
whatever, and
stripper
he's
pole.
and he's supposed to be kind of like half in the bag. To me, it was just like kind of just like very disingenuous, like an after school special. But like the banter between Don Cheadle and Robert Downey Jr. in this one and everything going forward is so good. And
Yeah.
so much more like genuine and fluid than what Terrence Howard and Robert Downey Jr. seem to have.
Yeah, well, Terrence Howard was coming off the high of Crash, which was an Academy Award winning movie, and he was a big name at the time. But now looking back at it, I don't think it's like a slight or an offense to say like Don Cheadle is just a way better actor than Terrence Howard.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree.
So Iron Man 2, directed by Jon Favreau, obviously Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, Gwyneth Paltrow returning as Pepper Potts, Mickey Rourke as Ivan Vanko, Scarlett Johansson as Natalie Rushman, aka Natasha Romanoff. Yeah, exactly. Sam Rockwell as Justin Hammer, Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury, and then Don Cheadle replacing Terrence Howard as Rhodey Rhodes. So yeah, let's get into it. This movie starts off in the credits with Ivan Vanko in Russia building what is his version of an arc reactor. And it comes out in these first few minutes that his father was a co-worker of Tony Stark's father, Howard Stark. And that's how he knows how to build an arc reactor just like Tony Stark does, because both of their fathers were kind of co-workers together building things. And it comes out later in the movie that Ivan Vanko's father was kind of cast off and put in a prison, and that's where all of this resentment towards whatever Tony Stark and the Stark family built comes from. So that's how this movie starts off hot with Mickey Rourke and his his gold teeth and chains and everything else. And then we get into Stark Expo. Obviously, Tony Stark is the belle of the ball, the cock of the walk. You got AC/DC playing, fireworks, girls dancing, and it just goes straight into telling you that like Tony Stark is that dude. From there, we go back to Tony Stark's lab. I know, Dougie, you like the tinkering aspects of Tony Stark and how he messes with his different things and changes, and basically shows you that his lab has gotten so much bigger since the first movie. Not only his lab, but his tech and everything else in between. So he's tinkering, going away. They show the multiple Iron Man suits. And through that, we find out that the arc reactor that's keeping him alive is also slowly poisoning him. So that's something that in the movie, he's drinking these green milkshakes to kind of counteract the side effects of the arc reactor. But going into this movie, or like later in this movie, they're going to talk about how he basically goes through not even like a quarter life or midlife crisis. He's going through like an end life crisis because he knows that this thing is killing him. So yeah, that's like about the first quarter of the movie. I'll go into this slide because this is the introduction of Scarlett Johansson's character, and she's basically taking over the Pepper Potts role because Pepper Potts is now running Stark Industries. So we get introduced to Scarlett Johansson, which later on becomes Black Widow, as she's just an assistant or like someone helping Tony Stark.
So I like the introduction of Natasha Romanoff this way only because it shows that like Shield didn't fully trust Stark yet, even though that he got brought in at the end of the first movie. That they're still kind of like, I'm not really sure if this is the guy. Having Tony give over the control of Stark Industries to Pepper in the movie, like that was, I think, is good character progression for everybody, but also like shows that there's that trust between the two of them, which is the cornerstone of their relationship and everything going forward. I think like the palladium poisoning, I think, was really cool because there really hasn't been something like that in the comics that I'm at least aware of, which means that it probably hasn't happened. And I'm sure there's some sweaty nerd that's going to tell me that I missed something, but like it's the palladium poisoning was cool. I think that was one of the cooler things that kind of came from that was he's drinking these like green milkshakes to try to like get this stuff to go away. And Fury just like taps him on the neck and it goes down right away. And they're like, we already know what's going on with you. So you got to figure this stuff out. And it's all based on what the element of the ring that's inside of the arc reactor is reacting with the rest of his body. So I thought that was really cool. It was a cool facet to put into the movie that, something that kind of I don't think really has been done before. I can't think off the top of my head when there was like Tony Stark has an arc reactor in his chest and it's killing him, So I liked that. Ivan Vanko was really cool to kind of see. It leads me to believe that Ivan Vanko is smarter than everyone who worked at Stark Industries because he too was able to build an arc reactor in basically a cave with a box of scraps. I liked that aspect of the character. I think Mickey Rourke playing Whiplash was fantastic. I think it was something that Mickey Rourke probably had. I mean, it's again popcorn movies. They're easy paydays, but I think that kind of getting the stink of like Sin City off of him for a bit was probably good with this one. But yeah, the introduction of the other like supporting cast characters are really good in this. And it's one of the better like highlights of the film in general.
So we'll jet set straight to the Monaco Grand Prix where we meet Justin Hammer, and not only Justin Hammer, but we got another cameo, and this time it's by that mother effer that tried to ban me from Twitter for using a Modest Mouse song. It's Elon Musk. I don't know if you noticed it, Dougie, but Elon Musk is in this movie. Thumbs down by CPG, thumbs down by me too, thumbs down by everybody. But I thought I'd toss this screenshot in there just to remind you of what a douchebag he is. So we're at the Monaco Grand Prix. We meet Justin Hammer for the first time. He's cocky. He's talking to Tony Stark. And then Tony Stark's like, well, you're not just like me, because they're trying to, like Justin Hammer is basically the Walmart version of Tony Stark. And we're like, well, yeah, well, Tony Stark says I'm driving in the race. So Tony Stark drives in the Monaco Grand Prix. And that's where we meet He-Man, except for it's got whips instead of a sword. So we get Whiplash for the first time, and he confronts Tony Stark during the Monaco Grand Prix. He slices up a bunch of cars and basically attacks Tony. Tony Stark kind of escapes and subdues Whiplash with the help of Happy Hogan and Pepper Potts. And that's where we first see the change in the technology of the Iron Man suit, because they gave him a suitcase that turns into the Iron Man suit. And that's basically the first quarter of the movie.
Yeah. So the one thing that like I wanted to point out that I thought was done very poorly during this race was how long between when he hits that first car and destroys that first car
Forever,
to
right?
where it's like it's seriously forever. And like any racing fan has got to be going. I'm not a racing fan, but any racing fan's got to be going nuts because it's like they know if there's an accident, all of a sudden, boom, they're getting the thing. Caution, caution, caution. All of a sudden, this dude's just going through and destroying all these different cars. And you mean to tell me, like, somehow with all the technology, Tony Stark doesn't get like any type of word that like there's a motherfucker out here with lightning bolts and like he's like destroying
Yeah.
shit? Like to me that was a little bit unbelievable. Like just the lack of time in between there. Like if they would have done like he destroys first car, second car, and the third car coming up is him, totally believable.
Yeah, we
It just
gotta.
lost me at the,
I noticed
as
the
cool
same
as
thing.
it was.
No police presence, no ambulances, no anything. It's just like let him go. There's a man out there in a bondage outfit and whips, and nobody gives a.
Yeah,
That was
right.
my on the rewatch. My observation is the same. That's why I said this ages like milk, pretty much, because there's too much of like, oh, perfect place, perfect time. I applaud Ivan Vanko for wearing his prison outfit early. Because he comes out in like a ripped up orange jumpsuit
Mhm.
and everything. The briefcase stuff is really cool. That they're really, technology and CGI really advanced between Incredible Hulk and this movie a lot. And you're getting more into like, what we're used to modern era MCU wise in this one. But yeah, I had felt the same thing. And I don't know, it's because like my stepdad watched a shit ton of NASCAR and I kind of know how races worked, where I'm like, don't think this would kind of go this way.
Yeah.
But I think like the biggest thing about that whole scene that really shines through is Tony Stark's under assessment of what the threat Whiplash really is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where he's like, oh, fuck this guy, get me in the car, get me out of here. And then he realizes, oh shit, I gotta put the suit on. And at that point it's almost too late because the briefcase armor really isn't totally equipped to handle it. And then they're able to exploit some weaknesses. It's quite a choice to not go like, I don't know. Some of the character designs for this, especially for Whiplash, are not great. But I guess makes sense at a certain point in time. Justin Hammer is an absolute gem. Sam Rockwell crushes that.
I love
Because
Sam Rockwell.
Justin Hammer in the comic books is just an old man with money. He's not really, he's just another Stark competitor. It's not, there's no flair or anything. And it's like Sam Rockwell basically just takes Robert Downey Jr.'s character of Tony Stark, which is not far off from anything in the comics, and makes it a cartoon character and just runs with it. And it's really, really good. It's another one of those instances where the MCU, Marvel Comics MCU is done right, where they know what the character can do, they know what the character's function is, and they make it better. And he's just so funny the entire movie. That was one of my favorite castings that I wish that they're going to go back to with the Armor Wars coming to
TV
Netflix
show
or Disney Plus soon.
Yeah, so we get we get Justin Hammer confronting, or actually like meeting Ivan Vanko in prison, basically realizing like this guy knows tech. This guy is what I've been missing because my tech team doesn't know shit. And we got to figure out some way to compete with Tony Stark. So we get the scene, one of my favorite scenes in all of the MCU, not because it's a good scene, but I quote, I want my bird.
I want my bird
all the time. I want my bird all the time.
I did that at work today. I'm not kidding you. I'm not making that up. Like my one of my coworkers and I, he's a big comic guy also. We were talking about, I gave him a new tape measure and some other stuff so that he can do his job, and whatever. And he's like, one more thing. And I'm like, what? He's like, I want my bird.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, got you a bird. It's a great bird.
So back in Malibu, we get Tony Stark basically, like I mentioned, going through his end life crisis because he knows that he doesn't have the technology to fix what's poisoning him. And we get DJ AM, shout out, or RIP DJ AM. I was a big DJ AM fan back in the day. And yeah, he just basically goes and gets hammered. No pun intended with Justin Hammer, but he gets drunk and throws himself a hell of a party. The next day, hungover, he goes to the donut shop to meet up with Nick Fury, and that's where we get the reveal that Natalie Rushman isn't who we thought she was. She is basically Black Widow or Natasha Romanoff. So this is the scene where CPG, you mentioned, they figure out how to alleviate his symptoms with just like a click of a pen or a stab of an EpiPen, if you will. And from there, I like how you mentioned it's like you don't have to do all this stuff on your own. I know you can try to figure everything else out, but it's okay to ask for help every once in a while. And sometimes things work better as a team. And that's something that Tony Stark, in the long run of these movies, we're going to figure out, like, has a trouble with, but also has to, figure out.
Yeah, I think one of the cooler things about the donut shop scene too, with the reveal of like, hey, we've been watching you this entire time, and we realize that this is going on with you. And there's like a little bit of shock on Tony's face where he's like, oh, you guys really know everything. And it brings the world together a little bit more.
Yeah. And I don't have any slides with him, but we get the return of Agent Coulson as well. Clark Gregg playing Agent Coulson, where he's going to have a lot to do in these first phase 1 of the MCU. You're going to see him a lot, Dougie. But he's another one of these guys where it's like Tony doesn't trust him at first, but then oh, this guy actually knows his shit. And like,
do you guys know how he got that role for
No.
Agent Coulson?
He's
John Favreau's neighbor.
No shit. Yeah, that's awesome. Shit. That's awesome. So yeah, so Justin Hammer and Ivan Vanko get to work. They basically, bid to try to, arm the government with the same kind of tech that Tony Stark has and Stark Industries has, because he's not using, his technology for, war profiteering anymore. We saw that in the first movie. So eventually, with the help of Vanko, Hammer creates what we first see as the War Machine. And that's basically an Iron Man suit with, a lot of bells and whistles. Mm-hmm. CPG, fan of the War Machine costume?
This particular costume versus everything that comes after it is so fucking good.
All right.
It is when Justin Hammer explains to Don Cheadle what's in the suit, it is a masterpiece of like, you are a fucking douchebag, but you know what you're putting into this suit and what it can do. Bust the bunker with the ex-wife, like the Gatling gun, and he's like, oh, this is too small for you. Well, I'm putting this in it. And I'm putting this in it. And it's man, it's so good.
It's basically a dick measuring contest within himself.
Oh, yeah.
It's basically like, here it is.
Is that too high school? Yeah. And he just kind of like just puts more and more and more into it. And this to me is a better War Machine build out for the suit than really anything that comes after it, because everything after it gets a little bit more spacey with the tech. He gets a little bit bigger, where like this is the War Machine I remember reading and
from
stuff
comics,
where the Gatling gun over the shoulder and all that stuff. There wasn't so much arc reactor tech and stuff in it. It was, this guy's got like he's strapped, right? Like in every single way. And it really was better in this movie than most of the ones after in terms of design.
So Hammer confronted by Tony Stark. If you guys notice in the background of like we've got all these like tech suits, basically, robots. And what we don't know, or what Tony Stark doesn't know, is that Ivan Vanko is controlling them from a different location, and they're about to turn on Tony Stark. So this is where we get to the like last half or last quarter of the movie. They're basically fighting mech suits, and they're trying to stop Ivan Vanko. At that point, we get Pepper Potts, Happy Hogan once again, and now the first real, scene where we see Black Widow in all of her, whether you want to say glory or in action, basically. And she's tossing her in karate, every wrestling move under the sun. If you're a Mexican luchador and you're tossing like head scissors and hurricane ranas and like 450 splashes and anything you could think of, she's doing against these, you know, like soldiers, if you will.
Yeah.
Security got taken out by everything that's in Super Crazy's arsenal. You know, like it was, it was, and you know, it was good. It for that at the time, it was something you want to see and something they go back to the entire time that the entire time the Black Widow's on screen. Anything is there's always that the kind of luchador hurricanrana move. It comes back again and again and again, and it's fantastic every time.
Yeah. So at that point, Ivan Vanko gets out, goes back into his suit where we get the full-fledged like bad boy Whiplash suit, and it's Iron Man and War Machine versus Whiplash. And Dougie, we mentioned it in the first Iron Man movie where like that last final battle was fairly quick. I feel like it happened again. Like
this was even quicker.
We get Iron Man versus Vanko for maybe 50 seconds, and I gotta still here. It was over in a flash, and we're like, I was like, and that's the end of the movie, and that's how Vanko gets defeated, and we're like, what in the hell was that?
Yeah, and so that was the big thing was I was like, here I am going into the third Marvel movie, and I'm like, oh, they have corrected the fight scene with Hulk, and I'm like, okay, so now this fight scene, it's going to be good. And it's over. I mean, seriously, it was like, I was like, how did they do it again?
I forgot how quick it was.
It was so quick. It was so quick. I don't know. I just don't like, I don't understand like their thought process on that. You know, like you build up your whole movie. And I will say that this movie had so many different directions it was pulling me in. You had, you know, Tony Stark going through a whole douchebag session, you know, with his party and everything like that. And just like, I mean, let's be real here. Okay. You're at a party and somebody's shooting shit and blowing it up over your head. I ain't fucking cheering. I'm leaving. You know, like that person's too drunk. I'm bouncing. Goodbye. You know, but like they're like, oh, shoot the chandelier above my head. You know, like it was just like, what the fuck, man? You know, like they made him extra douchey, you know, in that whole series of events and stuff. And I feel like they had way too many things kind of going on with this movie where if they would have just simplified it and just really got to like the root of like douchebag millionaire versus bad guy and really just focused on that, I think it would have been fucking great, you know, like, but it just missed, in my opinion. It was kind of a miss.
Yeah, Go ahead. Yeah, there's the thing that it was like that really stuck out, especially in the last quarter of the movie, is they really made like Justin Hammer like a bumbling idiot at the end, which they didn't have to. You know, they could have just made him the cocky millionaire and kind of tease it for other movies. And at the end, he's just like getting arrested and like he's like, oh, I don't know, like what the hell is that? Like you could have made him more of a badass if you ask him, because he's a great actor.
I almost completely forgot about one other thing that like just fucked me up royally was he finds his dad's model, okay, throws it into the drop top. Yeah, throws it into the drop top with all of the wind and everything like that. And then what's the first thing he does when he gets it inside the building? He goes and blows all the dust off of it. I'm like, it was just in a goddamn drop top. I'm like, it was in a drop top. Like, there's no fucking dust on that thing anymore. You know, like, I'm like, that is terrible.
That's a good call.
I haven't even noticed that, but that's actually really funny now that I think about it.
Dude, I'm telling you, go back and look at it. And I was just like, you got to be kidding me. But anyway.
All right, so last slide for Iron Man 2 end credit scene. We get Clark Gregg in the desert of Arizona, calling on his, cell phone, apparently to, at this point we know it's Shield, and we get the tease for the next movie, and it's Thor's hammer. So that's how this movie ends, and that's how he kind of gets you for the next one. Because when I saw this, I remember seeing this in theater, and I'm like, oh boy, here we go.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's
it's
Iron
good.
Man 2, Dougie. Any questions, anything before we get your grade?
There's going to be a lot of I don't know how to say it. There's going to be a lot of me admitting to stuff throughout this whole series and everything like that. I had to Google what the hammer was at the end.
Even now, like in 2023, you still didn't know like what the hammer was?
Yeah,
Because I understand
no.
like not knowing the movies, but like kids play with toys or something along the way triggers something else, and it snowballs that way.
See, I don't know. I don't think I've ever really seen like anybody like out of all the Marvel stuff, like Thor and Thor's hammer. Like I haven't really seen a ton of kids messing around with that. It's a lot of Spider-Man and a lot of
Yeah,
Iron Man
get
and
that.
stuff like that. Like I personally didn't know, so I was like, all right. I'm like, if it's a cutscene, it's obviously going to mean something, so I better look. And then when I Googled it, it was like next movie in line was Thor, and so I'm like, okay, so it's obviously Thor's hammer, and
Yeah.
go on.
If you would have came over to my place, I got a meat tenderizer that is Thor's hammer.
Do you really?
Yeah.
that's dope.
A bottle opener.
There you
Oh,
go.
look
See?
at that.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
All right, CPG. Any overarching thoughts on Iron Man 2?
So I like I said, Iron Man 2 ages like milk for all the bad reasons. Is that the final battle being over in less than probably 5 minutes is bad. I think that because at this time in the MCU's life, they were still very much keeping their run time to the typical movie. Where
Okay.
you'll see as you go on, Doug, is that these movies get longer and longer.
Oh no shit.
And that allows for better storytelling and better fight scenes and everything. But you are investing a lot of time into the movies that you're going to be watching as you go forward.
Okay.
Ivan Vanko's Iron Man Whiplash suit sucks. His drones suck. I don't like any of that. I understand the drone better shit, but I don't like it. Only because it's kind of it allows the scene to happen where Rhodey and Tony destroy everything without there having to be a human element to it. The small child that Tony jumps in front of to stop from being killed by a drone, it was retro kind of fitted to be Peter Parker, which I hate, but that's what it is.
I don't think I ever knew that.
Yeah.
Did they mention that in a movie?
No. So it's not mentioned in the movie, but it was retrofitted into the universe that was Peter Parker. And that
I don't
is
like that
why
either.
Future Peter Parker is infatuated with Tony Stark the way that he is. The end credits with Thor's hammer, obviously at that point, I think I'd gone to C2E2 that year, so I think I already knew that. Like, I'd seen a preview of Thor beforehand, and I was really excited about it. It definitely opens up the universe to like a lot of new things, so that's good. I think Iron Man 2 for me is probably like a 4.5 if I wanted to get in the point system out of 10, because it's a sequel in the worst way possible, where everything is very condensed where it doesn't need to be, and there's this aspect of Tony's character that they want to adapt, which is in the comics it was called Demon in a Bottle, and it was Tony Stark's alcoholism being very much addressed as affecting him as being Iron Man, and it essentially kind of goes into War Machine becoming Iron Man for a bit, and Armor Wars and all this other stuff later. The problem is that they don't really they touch on the alcoholism, they touch on how it affects him and his image and everything. But the whole throw the watermelon, burst the chandelier doesn't really make it his fault or his own shortcoming. It makes it the people around him. So it's like, oh, if Tony didn't have these people around him, he wouldn't be like this. No, Tony would have been like this anyway. So that was kind of the thing I kind of hoped they would have done, was make more things his fault, as it happens with, like, you know, those types of characters that have those shortcomings. But you know, that they didn't go that route. I don't like that scene at all, because it goes, by the time he's yelling and screaming and he scares everybody away. To me, that it was just that's not the character at all. It's nothing that was displayed in the movie before and anything like that. So I just didn't, that part of it I definitely didn't like. And of course, the final fight being over in for less than 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think a lot of it had to do with also, like we talked about it in the first show, like they didn't know how good Iron Man was going to be. They didn't know how much money it was going to make. It was kind of like a, you know, like, let's make this movie and see what happens. So when it did so well, then I could see, like, we got to make another one. And it does feel rushed. It feels like Iron Man 2 was rushed because they want to, you know, capitalize on the success of the first one.
Yeah, and if you look at the post-credit scenes too, it's like, okay, so your post-credit scene for Iron Man 1 is, hey, we're building a universe. Post-credit for the Hulk or Incredible Hulk is that, all right, this is part of it. This is the start of the building of the universe. When you get to Iron Man 3, now you're getting into the post-credit scenes teasing future projects. And so, okay, hey, Thor's coming up next. It's gonna, you know, whatever. And at that point, you know, a lot of people knew, because I think Iron Man 2 and Thor either came out in the same year or, like, you know, 14 months apart or something like that, where there wasn't a big wait in between them. And that, I think that's kind of how that kind of started that trope of, we're just going to keep teasing things in the future because you have to stay for that post-credit scene, because you want to know what's coming later, and it really roped a lot of people in.
All right, so you said 4.5. I'm giving it a 5.0. Dougie's score is what matters, because you're the reason we're doing the show. Dougie, what do you got?
I was going to go 5.9.
Okay, so a little higher than what I was expecting.
I think it really fell victim. I mean, I didn't really necessarily, I enjoyed it, didn't really like it as much as the first one. I think it fell victim a lot to, you know, the sequel, I don't know how you would say that or whatever, like
the trope.
Yeah. You know, it's like it nothing's ever going to be as good as the first time. Yeah. You know, it's just the way it is.
Now there's a few movies coming up where the second and even third time will surprise you of how good they are compared to the first one. Okay. So that's what I want to tease. We're going to get through Thor. I said, Dougie, I told you, we're going to have to sit through a couple clunkers. And I knew the Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2, even though, no offense, CPG, I know you like it a lot. We were going to have to sit through those movies to get through the real good stuff. We got one more. Yeah. Thor is really divisive. The first Thor, people love it or really hate it. I'm somewhere in between. I actually like it as a fish out of water story. But there's a lot of people that really don't. So I'm excited to see your thoughts, Dougie. And then from there, we're off and running. I think we got, like, if you don't like Thor, just give it time, and then we'll see where it leads us, because after Thor, we're gonna, you know, it's gangbusters.
Hell yeah. Man. Pot committed.
My advice going forward for you is that have patience, and there is a movie in this next slate that you'll be seeing that you have to watch with the same kind of mindset and like childlike wonder that you watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, because they're damn near the same movie. But it's just keep that kind of, you know, that type of energy, because there's some really, really good stuff coming up.
Question for Dougie. Have you watched Raiders of the Lost Ark?
I did this summer before the Yumper and Swole at the show thing. Know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did watch it for the first time.
All right. So we'll get perfect. All right, so that is both the Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2. Before we sign off, CPG, thank you once again. I imagine we're going to do these a couple times with you because we really do want to pick your brain, and you are, we are in the circle of White Sox Twitter. This is not a White Sox Twitter show, but that's how we met, and you are the, predominant force in comic book knowledge of that circle. So thank you. Where can we find you?
Well, you can find me on the Twitters or X at Comic Punk Guy. I write movie reviews and other nerd-tastic reviews over for the Sadistic Penguins at sadisticpenguinstudios.com. You can always find me there. I've written reviews for the Marvels, which is Marvel's latest project. Just did Godzilla -1, and I got one up there for Barbie and Spider-Man 2 on PS5, which was really fun to play through.
All right, Dougie, any last words?
Cool. No, just thank you to CPG for coming in and dropping some knowledge on me.
That's it. That's all we got for you guys. Thank you so much. Merry Christmas. If you're watching this on release day, thank you, everyone. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff. We'll see you next time for Thor. See ya.